Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we're going to look at the most anticipated RPGs of 2025. I'm going to have a look back at Blurgate and the 2-year anniversary of the OGL. We're going to have a deep dive into a question from one of our patrons about the lazy GM philosophy and how new DMs can better understand exactly how the 8 steps are intended to help with your game. And we're going to cover more questions from the December 2024 Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. This show is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, adventures, scenarios, source books, and other things to help them run their fantasy role-playing games. You also get to join the awesome Lazy DM community over on Discord, and you get to help me put on shows like this. To the patrons of Sly Flourish, thank you so much for your outstanding support. So over the past couple of months, and they have done so in the past, EN World has run a big poll on the most anticipated games of the year. Like, what games are you most anticipating for the year? They start with nominations. Morris from EN World posts a thing asking for nominations. He had very simple rules that even I failed to follow through, which is you have to say what game you're nominating and you have to link to the game that you're nominating so that he can actually look at the game and have something to link to. He goes, I will not look it up for you. I'm too busy. And I forgot. And I was like, 13th Age. And he's like, well, you already didn't do it. And I'm like, and I had to add the link. So 13th Age is on there. He asks for nominations, then he builds a big poll where everybody can select them from the ones that were nominated, and a bunch of people say, you forgot to do X, and he goes, I didn't forget to do X, you forgot to do X, you forgot to nominate it. But everyone that anybody nominated is on the poll. And then you vote for them, and people go in and they vote, and then he collects the votes and he talks about what the top 10 role-playing games, most anticipated role-playing games, voted by us on EN World were. There's little asterisks that are going to come next to some of these, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So, what were the top 10? Number 10, Starfinder 2nd Edition. I have not really heard much about Starfinder 2nd Edition. I've only played Starfinder 1st Edition once. It seems cool, seems great, and I'll tell you, when I saw the cover, and I don't know if let's see if they link to the cover now. I just saw the cover art for Starfinder 2E, and it looked really, really good. So this is the cover for Starfinder 2nd Edition, and I thought I thought that was a really kick-ass cover. So I that looks really neat. It's not really my thing. I don't play a lot of science fiction role-playing games. I don't really play Pathfinder very much, but it looks cool. I'm eager to see what I see when it comes out, because it looks cool and people are excited about it. I did like Starfinder. Alien Evolved Edition from Free League. I never actually played the original Alien RPG. I know people that liked it. I think it's a really good premise for an RPG. I think I like the premise for Alien better than I like the premise for Blade Runner, because Blade Runner, you have to navigate so many problematic topics in order to really play a Blade Runner game. And I just don't know if that's the kind of game I want to play. Alien, on the other hand, is like you fighting xenomorphs, and I have very little issue with are we, what's the colonial aspects of destroying a xenomorph stuff? Probably not as much. But I think I'd play Mothership as well. I think I'd rather play Mothership than play Alien. I'm not, this is the thing. This is just me, right? We all have our own opinions. The RPGs that are built on other people's IPs tend not to really excite me that much. I'm more excited when I see creators that are building their own world out their own way. It's more important to me than saying I definitely want to play a game that's set in a world that I've already played in. I'm not against it. I don't think it's bad. I certainly don't hold anything to people who really are eager to play in those. But I'm always kind of interested to see RPGs that are building around their own IP rather than ones that are kind of building off of other ones. I'd certainly play it, though. I'd play an Alien RPG in a minute. 13th Age 2nd Edition. This was, I think, my number 1 vote. It's only number 8 on the list, but I guess when you look at the other ones that are here, I can kind of understand why. 13th Age is my favorite fantasy D20 based RPG built off of the bones of 4th edition D&D so far. There's another one on this list that may eclipse it, but we'll see. I already know, though, that while this one is built off of the bones of 4E in a way that I really resonate with, I don't know that the other one does, because of the question of tactical versus non-tactical. 13th Age is not a tactical role-playing game. It uses abstract distances, it uses abstract decision-making for areas of effect and things like that, but I really love 13th Age. Rob Hainsou and Jonathan Tweet are amazing designers who are deep into the history of D&D, and they have now had, I think, 10 years years of 13th Age to kind of work off of. So I'm very eager to see 13th Age second edition. I've looked at the playtest a little bit, but I finally said, you know what? I just want to wait till this is done and see it when it's complete. So I'm very excited for 13th Age second edition. Coriolis, the Great Dark. I don't really know anything about this one, by Free League, a big sci-fi RPG that I guess they had done, and people like them some science fiction. And Free League is a excellent publisher that makes really, really good RPG products. So that looks good. Dolmenwood, I'm very excited about. This is also on one of the ones that I voted for. We have folks in our Discord chat. Elizabeth, Patrick Paladin, Elizabeth in our Discord server has been playing a ton and talking a lot about Dolmenwood. I've perused the PDFs and I like very much what I see, but this really feels like the kind of RPG that I want to hold in my hands in a physical book to really see. So I'm excited for the physical books to come out. I think they're like on a boat, right? I think they're coming out really soon, but it looks really excellent. Like this, they take kind of the old school bones of RPGs, but then wrap it in a very rich setting, very, table usable design. Really looks cool. Did very well on Kickstarter, so I'm excited to see that. So that was definitely on my list as well. Terry Pratchett's Discworld, Adventures in Ankh-Morpork. I don't know anything about this one either. I know I've read Discworld and it looks cool. One of the fun things about Discworld is that it actually seems to have it was the first novel I read that had Vancian style magic in it outside of Jack Vance, where it talked about how spells leave your mind when you cast them and stuff like that. I didn't back it. I don't really know anything about it. People are very excited. It kind of fell into that category of, oh, look, another IP-based role-playing game. There's lots of them, and it wasn't one that grabbed me. Draw Steel by MCDM. This is the other sort of based on the bones of 4E. My friend James Intercasso is a lead designer on it. Obviously built with a lot of philosophies that Matt Colville holds dearly. And they've been playtesting the hell out of it. They have a huge playtesting. I have a huge playtesting arm. I have no doubt that this is going to be a super well-made RPG. The question is the tactical side of it the thing that's going to excite me or not? Because I'm just not really into that. We'll see. I'm definitely going to pick it up. I'm definitely excited. I would certainly play it. The question is that one side of making sure that it's a tactical kind of grid-based fantasy. I've kind of moved towards more abstract theater of the minds, or at least having the option for abstract and theater of the mind combat that I get with 5e, that I get with 13th Age, that I get with other systems. So we'll see how that plays out. But it looks really good. I'm very excited for it as well. Daggerheart. Everyone's been talking about Daggerheart. This is the deep home system built by Darrington Press, the imprint arm of Critical Role. It's going to be interesting to see if they move over to Daggerheart when they start doing their live play games. I think they've already been doing some Daggerheart games, but whether their main Critical Role game moves to Daggerheart will be interesting. I haven't really heard anything about it. I haven't really played it. A lot of people have dived into it and tried it out. I really haven't. It's another one that, if I go to a convention, I would certainly play it, but we'll see. Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere was I think the biggest role-playing game Kickstarter that was ever done. Huge amount of money. No surprise that it ends up as number 2 on the list. And again, another one. The weird one about this was the average price was $300 or something. It was really, really expensive to get the physical version of it. And that sort of set me back from saying you can't really just try it out. So I don't know anything about it. I know it was very, very popular, and we'll see when it comes out. But obviously a lot of people not only backed it, but are also eager to see it come out because Cosmere ended up number 2. Number 1 is Legends of the Mist by Son of Oak. I had never heard of this before. And so it did very well on Kickstarter. It had 8,500 backers on Kickstarter. Seems like a good one. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I'm very excited about this one. And I hadn't really heard of it. And I got to say, I was surprised that the number 1 most anticipated role-playing game in the EN world was a game I hadn't even heard of before. And I found out why. And it's because on their Kickstarter page, they said, hey, it turns out that we're being nominated for one of the most anticipated role-playing games. It would be really awesome if you voted. So they kind of stuffed the ballot box a little bit. It doesn't really matter. It's not like they gave people anything for voting, but it is a question of what other groups, I don't know if Jonathan Tweet and Rob Hainso blasted an email out saying, hey, vote for us. And I don't know if it really matters, right? That's fine. And the fact that they're number 1, I don't know. I mean, if I was making an RPG, I sure would want to be on the top of the list, and I would sure want to be on the list. So I don't think I'm not knocking them for saying, hey, fans, we are up for top RPG. It'd be great if you voted for us, to the 8,500 people that backed them on Kickstarter. And that's probably why they ended up as number 1. I think it's worth knowing that that's why they ended up as number 1. I don't think it's something that we have to knock them for. What it really tells me is I wouldn't worry at all about where a game ranked on this list. I wouldn't say, oh, because Dolmenwood was number 6 and 13th Age was number 8 shows how much more popular Dolmenwood is than 13th Age. That may be true. And given, you could probably look at the Kickstarters alone and determine that. I wouldn't worry about it. I would instead look at this list of 10 potential RPGs that are coming out and ask yourself, which ones are you excited about? That matters more. So the fact that one is on number 1 and how they got to be number 1 doesn't really matter. It's also interesting, like one thing that they brought up is 13th Age 2nd Edition was the most anticipated RPG of the next year for 3 years. So for 2023, 2024, 2025, people are really looking forward to 13th Age because it has taken them a long time to make this game. But I don't think the Kickstarter for it happened until pretty late. People were excited about this one before they even launched a Kickstarter. So it wasn't like they've been sitting on people's money for 3 years while they were making this game. So, fun list. And I think kind of if you're interested in taking a look at the RPGs that are coming out in the next year and you're looking at what's happening, then there's also like, what RPGs do you want to play in the next year? I talked a little bit about this before. There's a bunch of, I would play a ton of games. Like if I go to conventions and have the option to sign up for games and play, that's great. Games I want to run, I definitely would love to run Shadow of the Weird Wizard. That's one I'm super excited about. I talked about that before. And I definitely want to run 13th Age. Both of those are systems that are on my big list of games that I want to play sometime in the next year, where I'd run either a small campaign or even a long campaign using those systems, because I am confident that I would like both of those games. I would definitely want to play MCDM Draw Steel, and the other ones I would definitely play. I don't know that any of them grab me as like, that is the kind of campaign. Oh, Dolmenwood. Dolmenwood is another one where I would definitely want to run a game in it and see. I'm not sure the fairy tale nature of the style. We'll have to see if that's something that really grabs me. But it looks really good. So that would also be my list of games that I would want to run. Even if I was only run like a short campaign, I would be excited to run that. So anyway, really fun list of the 2025 most anticipated TTRPGs voted by us on EN World. You can find a link to that in the show notes. A couple weeks ago, when I had a week off from my Sunday game, I did a year-end retrospective where I talked about kind of all the big things that happened in the year. There was one thing that happened in the year that I forgot to talk about. And when I heard it, I'm like, no one wants to hear me talk about this again. And that was the Blurgate situation. So for anybody that remembers it, back then when the 2024 Player's Handbook came out, Wizards of the Coast had sent 2 batches of review copies. They sent the PDFs out to one group very early, and then they sent the physical version to a second group not quite as early. It was before the official release date in stores, but the book was already available at Gen Con, so it meant that the public already had access to the 2024 Player's Handbook. They did put an embargo for those of us who received the physical version, but it was like a week. It was a very short embargo, and like nobody worried about it because they're like, we can certainly wait a week before we post it. So there wasn't any issue with the embargo. And many of us took the opportunity, including like setting up a crazy studio situation, to actually show the book, because I didn't have a digital version. So I couldn't show you the book if I didn't show you the physical version of the book. And I did. I showed the physical version of the book. And I put a video, I did 2 videos, one that I posted right away, right after the embargo, and then one that I posted or planned to post the following week, where I built a character using the book. And I showed a bunch of stuff in the book. I did a flip through of the book, not the entire book, but I showed off a lot of the book because I was like, they gave me the book. That's what they wanted. And in their note to me, they said, please don't show any of the internals from the book until after the embargo date, which implies that you can do it after the embargo date. And then something happened, and I got a note that was like, you need to take your video down, or you need to edit your video again to get rid of this stuff. And I was like, you got it. I remember it was Saturday morning. I'm sitting at the kitchen table enjoying breakfast with my wife. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Now you're going to come and tell me this after I just spent like a day. I had spent I took a day off from work to make these videos in the first place so that I could get them out on time and get them out in front of people so they could see them. And I'm like, now you're telling me I got to take them down. So I emailed back and forth with them. And the short answer was that like, some of the videos, people had taken screenshots and built a PDF of the book from screenshots from the videos. And they'd actually done that. The answer isn't go after the people who promoted the book. The answer is go after the people that are bootlegging the PDF. Or, in my opinion, put out a PDF yourself and sell it so that people don't have to go buy a bootleg PDF. They can go buy the PDF itself. So anyway, it was a big thing. And if you want to see more about it, I have numerous videos that I did on it. And I did interviews with like Morris over at EN World where I talked about, there's lots of stuff where I talked about Blurgate. But I forgot to talk about Blurgate as something that happened in the past year. And it all, got solved. And actually, we're going to talk about like how it got solved and the situation and how it played out because it falls into this larger topic, which also I think goes back to the idea that today, on 5 January, Sunday, 5 January 2025, is the exact 2-year anniversary of the first mainstream article to talk about the OGL crisis back in 2023. Written by Lynn Codega over on Gizmodo, the first exclusive look of, there had been talk about it before. There were definitely rumors and things that were going on. There were I was hearing from people that had known somebody who saw the things that they were doing. Lots of talk about it. But the first article that really opened the doors on what was going on with the OGL was this article by Lynn Codega on January 5th, 2023, 2 years to the day as today. And I said, that's kind of noteworthy too. A, the topic of me not talking about how Blurgate happened over the last year, and B, the fact that we are at the 2-year anniversary of the OGL, because I think these things are kind of related. And I think that when we look at these situations, and we can look at a whole bunch of other situations that have happened with Wizards over the past year and 2 years, thinking back over the past 2 years, we can see the same symptoms. And when we look at the same symptoms, we can all kind of, in my opinion, narrow them down to a central cause. And that is what I thought would be useful. And what recognizing that potential cause can do for us as hobbyists in the hobby, as GMs who love playing role-playing games, what can we do with this information as we draw this all together? So let me build off of that theory here for a minute. A couple of other things, these are more sort of symptoms that we want to sort of put out there, right? Things that we can look at, and then you can say, does this root cause all sort of fit with all of these other symptoms? And some of them are for like in this last week, it was announced that D&D, that Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro have partnered with a electronic gambling company to make a new sort of online digital slot machine system. And I saw that and went, huh. And then some other people saw it and went, oh my God, can you look at what they're doing? Like, is that really, you want D&D to be like promoting gambling, right? And then other people are like, they had slot machines 2 years ago, right? So lots of different conversations about the slot machine side of it. They also mentioned, which I think is far cooler, that there is a D&D pinball game, $7,000. It was the first time I've heard a $7,000 pinball game. I'm like, I wonder if I could have room for that somewhere. I wonder if I could fit that. It'd be kind of cool to have the Dungeons and Dragons pinball machine in my office. $7,000 is a lot. And you know that you're going to have to have a full-time staff to make sure that thing works because it's a great big pile of mechanics. There's no way that thing is not going to break. But it looked cool. And you're like, and the neat thing about the pinball machine is the idea that it's actually a campaign pinball machine. You build a character and you watch your character grow as you're playing long-term pinball. It is sort of like legacy gaming in board gaming, that you now have a pinball game where you're gaining levels and doing campaigns and things like that. I thought that was pretty neat. Right? But both of those are kind of unexpected things. The gambling thing is one where you kind of look and you can frown and be like, do we really want D&D to be promoting online gambling? But from the other side, hey, a cool pinball machine. Nobody really thought that they'd be making a pinball. It's not the first D&D pinball machine either. So do we have, do we have that? And somebody just brought up in the chat, Pixelrithic says, what's next? Tasha's vapes? You should not assume there won't be Tasha's vapes. That is a lesson that I want you to pick up. Do not discount the idea that there will be Tasha's vapes. Probably there won't be Tasha's vapes. but you're hitting the nail on the head, which is what I'm getting to. I think that we can think back over all of these different things that have kind of occurred. And particularly, we're going to look at the ugly ones for a minute. I want to look at the good stuff too. Wizards has done a lot of really good things for the hobby over the past year. And I don't want to forget those. And I'm not going to forget them and I'm going to mention them. But we're going to look at some of the stumbling that has occurred, right? Some of the stumbling is, obviously the OGL fiasco was a big one. The weird miscommunication stuff that happened with the 2023 summit. The whole question of AI art, right? There were AI art that showed up in Bigsby's, and then all of a sudden they said, oh, we're never going to do it. And then suddenly there was AI art in the marketing that they were doing for Magic the Gathering. We had the whole situation with the Pinkertons going after somebody who got an early set of Magic cards. We have Blurgate. We have all these stuff. We even have like weird combinations of conversations about AI. We've got a note on D&D Beyond that says we are humans building human material for human beings. We are human beings making creative material for human beings. AI doesn't really have a place. They said that at the 2023 summit. They said it in an article online. They talked, and this came out after like artists and stuff like that had been using AI to enhance the art that they were sending to Wizards of the Coast. So they said, we are going to have it in our thing. And then you have the CEO of Hasbro saying, oh, we're totally going to do AI with D&D. Oh, all my friends use it. Oh, yeah, no, D&D is definitely going to have a place. Now, obviously, you could be like, oh, yeah, but what he's talking about is not that they're going to make books out of AI, which is probably true. I don't think they're going to use AI to make books. But they're going to have AI somewhere else. And it feels like it's communication coming from different places. So part of it is like, and I've had this conversation with many friends of mine, plenty of people were involved in and understood how bad the OGL, trying to revoke the OGL was going to be for Wizards of the Coast. They knew how bad that was going to be. People inside the company absolutely knew that that was a disastrous idea. So bad was it that it had come up in the early days of 4th edition and was shot down, which means they had been thinking about it for like a decade. Right? And we know that there's this oscillation between we love the OGL, we hate the OGL, right? They love the OGL, they hate it, they love it, they hate it, they love it, they hate it. They've oscillated between whether or not they support the OGL or they don't support the OGL. And we have seen that happen over the years. So we know that there's these conversations happening internally, but then suddenly something happens and something changes, and whoever has an idea that happens to be in the right political place at the right time is able to expose that to the public. And then that causes a problem. Same thing with Blurgate. If you look at the Blurgate situation, I was talking to Michelle about it earlier. If you look at the Blurgate situation, the end result of all of that turmoil were basically two things. One was WOTC looked like a bunch of jerks because in the end, I didn't even have to change my videos. I did change my videos and then I changed them back again. I had other friends of mine who just didn't even listen to it. They're like, no, I'm not doing anything. Or like, it's going to be too hard. I'm not going to do it. You can tell me to take it down. And then they didn't, right? And then video stayed up. The end result was nothing. The end result was there was no difference in my videos. My videos went up the way that they went up, the same way that they went up when I recorded them, only now I was mad. The only result of that was that I was mad. Now, the other thing, which I'm not going to discount, is I got a lot of extra traffic on my YouTube channel than I did, and I probably would have otherwise. So it turned out, even financially, it was worth it for me to have taken that day off because, the truth is the revenue came in. And also I was right at the beginning of a Kickstarter and it helped me get more attention to the Kickstarter that I was running. I didn't want it. I didn't ask for it. I didn't hope for it. And if they had gone back in time and removed that, I would have preferred that they would have not done it at all, even though it meant extra traffic for me. I didn't want the extra traffic. I certainly didn't want it that way. But the end result was nothing changed. At all of that turmoil, all of the bad press, these are the voices of the lovers of their game acting as megaphones for their brand new product, including me, right? I love D&D and I was happy to talk about it. I was excited to talk about it. And you can see it in the videos where you can hear me being excited and talking about it. That suddenly now I'm mad again. And then I'm like, I don't know why I would work with these people again, right? Because how do I trust them? If I thought I was your friend, no, you can't be friend with a company. But I thought we had an agreement about what we were going to do. And then next thing I know, I have to worry if you're going to take my channel down or not. So where all this comes from is miscommunication inside the company. That there are a lot of people inside this company. They have a lot of different ideas. They have a lot of different purposes and backgrounds. They have a lot of different drives and motivations and interests in what they do. And there is no clear voice at Wizards that derives things one way. There are lots of different voices speaking internally on lots of different things. Whoever it was that decided they were going to send me a copy of the 2024 Player's Handbook was not also worried about me putting up videos that somebody else could screenshot and turn to a PDF. A whole different person probably in the company is in the risk management side who said, this is a huge risk and we need to do something about it, and got enough attention that they said, okay, I guess we're going to have to email Mike Shea and tell him he needs to take his video or he needs to modify his video. Even though he did it for free and even though he didn't pay, we didn't pay him anything, we're going to have him do this. Somehow that left the building. And it didn't need to, because in the end result was the same. But somehow it left the building, just like the OGL thing did. For 10 years, that thing seemed to be under wraps. The idea that they wanted to try to deauthorize the OGL stayed inside the company and never left, until suddenly it did. And then suddenly something happened. There is no clear central direction of either benevolence or malevolence coming from Wizards of the Coast. There is no idea that they either want to be a truly altruistic company that wants to help everyone in the hobby, or that they are just there to squeeze as many dollars out of us as they can, however they can, by selling us Tasha's vapes. By the way, I'm keeping the Tasha's vapes idea. I really like that idea. Thank you for that. Instead, what we can expect from them is this is much of the same, a bit of chaos, a bit of miscommunication. Almost certainly we're going to see other missteps that occur. Hopefully, and I expect to see a lot of good things that come out of them too. In this last 2 years, let me focus on that for a minute. All of the things that I talked about, the Blurgate, AI art, Pinkertons, OGL itself, all this kind of stuff, all these sort of stumbling things that have occurred. There's also a bunch of things that they've done over the past 2 years that have been great, some of which have been quite unexpected. The example, one of them, not exactly unexpected, but there were definitely people who are like, I bet you they're going to make only digital versions of the 2024 stuff. What if they don't even make books? Obviously they did. The D&D 2024 books are actual physical books you can buy and own forever, right? So we know that they did that. This one was a surprise. They released the D&D 2024 material on Roll20 and Foundry, and then released it to Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, which they had supported before, but we weren't exactly sure if they're going to continue to support it given how much of an investment they have in their own VTT. But then also expanded it out to Foundry, the biggest, I think it's like the second biggest VTT that's out there. 2 of those let you download it and keep it forever, which is something that other VTTs don't. That was not, I did not expect that. I had hoped for it and I didn't expect it, and it happened. And I think that was really good. They did in the end of the OGL thing. We ended up in a better place than we were originally, which is the 5.1 SRD wasn't just, they didn't just say, hey, we're not going to dork with the OGL. They said, we're actually going to release it under a different license that we are pretty sure you're going to trust more than the OGL, which is the Creative Commons license. And they released the 5.1 SRD in Creative Commons in English, German, French, Spanish, and Italian. So they released it in 5 different languages so that people all over the world can use it to build their own RPGs and build their own accessories around 5e. And in my mind, that changed 5e completely from what it had been, which was the rule set that D&D was built on, to a new open rule set similar to Linux that lets you, I think the metaphor for Linux fits perfectly, that is now a new open platform that many people can build an entire suite off of. So I think that was really good. They released a really good and free after-school D&D adventure, getting people and getting kids into D&D for free. They release a lot of stuff for free. The D&D 2024 free rules, known as the free rules on D&D Beyond, are absolutely free. I think it'd be really cool if those are also available in a PDF. But hey, they're free. What are you gonna say? You can go and you don't even need to log in. You don't need to create an account. You can go and you can get all access to all of the material that they have under the free rules for D&D 2024. I think that's great. And they have continued to state repeatedly that they plan to release a 5.2 SRD under a Creative Commons license that includes the updates for the D&D 2024 rules after the 2025 Monster Manual comes out. That's one I'm watching really closely. I mean, because it's one that, like, God help me, they better do it. I'm going to be so mad if they don't do it. That is a really good one. And they have continually stated, even as they've had sort of different people shift in and out of power at Wizards of the Coast, and particularly over D&D, they have still stated that is something they're going to do. So I believe they will. I trust that they will. I hope my trust is not misplaced. All of that said, so those are all the good things that they've done over the past couple of years, as well as all of the things that they've stumbled on over the past couple of years. And what I think we can take from this as GMs, why does this matter to us as hobbyists and GMs? It may not matter to you at all. If you're just like, hey, I'm here to play the Alien RPG, or I'm here to play D&D, or I'm here to play whatever, and you really don't care what's going on in the larger TTRPG hobby/industry, particularly with the number one biggest producer of tabletop role-playing games, you're going to be fine because you own all the games, you own all the material, you can play it forever. Even 5th edition D&D. We can even pretend they didn't put a monster manual out. They certainly are, but let's pretend they didn't. We're still cool. Even the first 2 books we can play with, and we're set for as long as we want. So you don't really need to pay that much attention to it. But if you are paying attention to it, the one thing that I would hang on to, which I have to hang on to, is it's really unpredictable what Wizards of the Coast is going to do with D&D. We don't know what they're going to do. I feel pretty confident about them doing things like putting out the Monster Manual and putting out the 5.2 SRD. And I'm pretty sure that they're going to put out the books that they have said that they're going to put out, because they're pretty good about saying we're going to make a new book and then putting out that book. I think we can trust all of that. Beyond that, I couldn't predict for a minute what Wizards of the Coast is going to do with D&D, whether they're going to do Tasha's Vapes, whether they're going to do really great things. Are they going to open source D&D Beyond? I would be so excited if they did that. I don't think so. I wouldn't count on it. Are they going to stumble? Absolutely. Are they going to still stumble on things? Absolutely. Because in all of the things that I've seen over the past couple of years that have occurred, I haven't seen anything that has told me that the communication issues that are occurring inside of Wizards of the Coast as it relates to D&D are better or are going to change. And we wouldn't know. The only thing we would know is like after 3 years looking back and go, you know what? They didn't really stumble on anything. Nothing really bad happened and everything was pretty solid, right? And they did these other good things. That could happen, but you can only look at that after the fact. You can't really predict that that's what's going to happen in the future. So my main point is like, and you know, I'll pick on like one thought in particular. When we look and we say, oh, look at that, D&D is working with a company that's making slot machines. How terrible. Let go, right? Like they're the ones that are in charge of the brand. We're not in charge of the brand, and we don't get to decide what they're going to do with the brand. We can be mad. Everybody can be mad for any reason that we want. The question is like, what can we do with that? Because they're not going to change, right? They're going to, you know, we can't count on them changing, I think is our point. We can't assume that things are going to get better. And again, if like 1 million people on Blue Sky all yelled about how they're promoting gambling and that's ruining people's lives because of your D&D, and that's not what we want to see, maybe they would change, right? That's one thing. But the other one we could do is recognize that our hold on the hobby is our own. I say this all the time. I'm going to say it again. Don't let Wizards of the Coast determine your happiness with tabletop role-playing games. That's the lesson that I always come back to. The other little side lesson that I would take from this, which is how I've thought about, you know, thinking back on Blurgate this year and also thinking back on 2 years of the OGL, is we should just generally recognize that I don't think Wizards of the Coast is a malevolent company at all. I think I've made that point by talking about 5 major things that they've done that have made the TTRPG hobby better in the past year. And that's only just 5. And one of those contains 5 things, which is releasing in under 5 languages. I think they're chaotic. I think so are most giant companies, publicly traded companies with lots of employees and lots of things going on and $4 billion revenue. They're chaotic, and a lot of chaotic things can happen, and people can find themselves in positions of power and make decisions without thinking through all the things, and those decisions leak outside of the company and it causes issues. And that's why you can see things like the AI art getting out the door. That's why you can see things like the Pinkertons. That's why you can see things, you know, like the OGL overall. It's not that they're bad. It's that they're chaotic. And I think what we can do is recognize that they're a chaotic company. Some of the chaos that comes out of there could be really good. And we could go, wow. I mean, I don't know if it's exactly chaos, but the idea that they said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and support Foundry. I could have seen an executive arguing against that idea pretty heavily, and that didn't happen. So that's great. That works out in our benefit. Right? Even putting out the 5.2 and the 5.1 SRD in the Creative Commons. None of us expected that. Nobody I talked to said, I bet they do this. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people in the industry and hobbyists who are deep in it. Nobody predicted that was going to happen. And it did, and that was great. So that chaos doesn't mean it's going to be bad. The chaos could be really good too. But all I can tell you is it's basically unpredictable. What they're going to do is unpredictable. So what we can do is make sure that whatever direction they go, we can benefit from all the good stuff and the bad stuff doesn't affect us. That to me is where we can put ourselves in a position that's really good. And I think we do that by hanging on to the hobby itself as it sits in front of us and making sure that we are not reliant upon the future choices of whoever is at Wizards of the Coast for the direction of the happiness that we have in our game. Patrons of Sly Flourish get access to all kinds of cool tools, a 5e artisanal monster database, a Forge of Foes monster stat builder, lots of different little JavaScript tools, all of them that are downloadable so that you can keep them on your own machine and use them or host them on your own site or whatever you want to do with them so that you can use them yourself. One of the tools that I offer, and you know, I've now been doing this show for the talk show itself for not quite 5 years, a little bit more than 4 years. And one of the things that I wanted to do was build a database for patrons so that patrons can search for any given topic like OGL and find not only the videos where I talked about whatever topic they're interested in, but also manage to link to the specific part of the video where I talk about that thing. So if you want to see what I thought was really fun, my WOTC OGL 1.1 announcement section, you can do so. You can watch a video where I talk specifically about that, and it jumps to that spot in the video in order to help you out. There are now more than 2,000 entries in this database. That there are 2,058 different topics that I have talked about going back to November 28th, 2020. First one on here was my spotlight on running Owlbear Rodeo, the original Owlbear Rodeo from 2020. So it's not quite 5 years old. It's more like 4 years ago. My Rime of the Frost Maiden Thoughts product spotlight. highlight. There are tips in here. There are commentary on various things. You can look at for just Patreon questions. If you're like, I just want to see all the Patreon questions, you can type a Patreon question and it will sort of filter on the topic category of Patreon questions and show you the 900 different Patreon questions I have answered in here. You can search for things like theater of the mind and, tactical combat and theater of the mind, maps, theater of the mind, and it's just searching the topic. It's not doing any kind of fancy searching of the text that's behind it or anything like that. But it's a really great way to be able to see all of the different topics that I've talked about. If there's a particular product, so you're like, Monster Overhaul, you can type in overhaul and Monster Overhaul. I talked about this last week, and you can click on that and it goes straight to the YouTubes, straight to me talking about the Monster Overhaul. I wanted this to exist for a few reasons. One is I wanted it. I wanted a way to be able to search the old topics that I had talked about so I could kind of see what I did. But also, I want these videos that I'm making to last. I want people to be able to find information in these videos that's useful to them well after I've recorded it. It's a great way for patrons when they're asking Patreon questions to check to see whether or not I've already answered a question that's similar to this. It's also just a way to kind of, if you want to dive into your board, you can go and pick a couple of tips and take a look at them. I do regularly go back because it's kind of interesting for me to say, what did I say about this a year ago or 2 years ago? I did watch my old OGL video where I talked about the OGL because I thought it would be really kind of interesting to see what my take on it was back then. And it was really interesting. I was excited about it. One thing this video doesn't have is just talk show videos. So it doesn't go through lazy prep videos. It doesn't go through my other TM tip videos. You can, of course, search YouTube to find those videos, but they don't really have tables of content. So I didn't really feel like it needed one. So that's the Lazy RPG Talk Show database. This is available to patrons of Sly Flourish. You sign up, you get a link to this. I update it. It's updated every Monday whenever I have the new video posted. Part of my process is adding new ones to this list, so it's really handy. It actually kind of goes hand in hand with another database I have called the Q&A database. So this is similar, but it actually is a full text search of patron questions. And it has thousands of patron questions that people have asked on Patreon. And like the other one, you can search and you can see the top results for any search query you run. It doesn't actually even tell you how many are in here, but it's a lot. There's a lot of Patreon questions since 2021. So again, 4 years worth of Patreon questions that are in here. And you can search and see what what answer did I give for people that asked a particular question. You could type in secrets and clues. And you can get, different things about secrets and clues all throughout here. So this one actually has a full text search of all of that stuff. And again, completely downloadable. So you can download this site. It's actually bundled together in a little package. It's got a JSON file. It's got a couple of little JavaScript things that run in the back, but it's all runnable on your local machine. You don't have to necessarily go to my website to get it or go to the link that's inside the Patreon. So that way, if you want to have a copy of all of these questions, you can get a full copy of all the questions that are there. So those are two features of the many, many features that patrons of Sly Flourish get. I just wanted to kind of show those ones off because for two reasons. One is, if you're not a patron, I want you to see the kind of awesome stuff you can get by being a patron of Sly Flourish. If you are a patron, I want to remind you that you have access to this stuff. As a patron, the best thing you can do to get value out of the work that I do on Patreon is go regularly to that front link. I have one page that has a link to all of the rewards that patrons get. We do have two levels of patrons now. We have the veteran tier and the hero tier. The hero tier gets another page that has other extra stuff on it, including another weekly podcast that I do called Readings and Reflections, and access to these new City of Arches scenarios that I've been doing, which I'll show off in the future. But those are a couple things that I wanted to show off today and hopefully get your interest in becoming or remaining a patron of Sly Flourish. I get, as one of the things we do for the patrons is we have the Patreon Q&A, and I'm going to go dive into a bunch of Patreon Q&A questions coming up here. But there was one question that I got from a new patron of Sly Flourish that I thought was really good, and I wanted to spend a bit of time diving into this particular question because I think this is something that I don't hear about it often, but I definitely hear about it, and I think it's good to go. So I'm going to answer. So Adam R. says, as a new GM, sometimes I find it hard to apply your lazy GM philosophy. This is partly due to my own enjoyment and appreciation for detailed prep, but I have come to recognize a lot of assumptions in the lazy GM approach that you don't seem to speak about much because you have developed your approach from the perspective of an experienced GM. As an inexperienced GM, I have found this style of prep relies heavily on improvising successfully at the table, and I find myself struggling to have the confidence and knowledge to do this. For example, just listing out the type of monster for a session relies on you being able to create a balanced encounter on the fly. Additionally, you seem to have no need to prepare dialogue ahead of time, whereas I find struggling for words and contradicting myself when I have NPCs provide exposition. Can you discuss what the lazy GM approach assumes about what a GM needs to do at the table? So, great question. And I think, hits an important point, and particularly is useful in looking at the 8 steps from Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master and how they came about. When I wrote the original Lazy Dungeon Master book, I made an assumption that it was a book for more advanced DMs. That when I wrote it, I said, the expectation is you've probably run dozens to hundreds of games already, and now are looking for ways to refine your prep. But I got so many people that said, I started off brand new and I started with the principles of the Lazy Dungeon Master and they helped me immediately. I had so many people say that I was like, maybe I am discounting how valuable this stuff can be even for new DMs. Now, the answer is it's probably helpful for some new DMs and probably not as helpful for other DMs. And it depends on what you need. And one of the things I tried to do with Return is really build it on helping you prepare what you need to run your game and not anything else, right? That's really the core philosophy of Return, is prepare what you need to run your game and not prepare stuff that doesn't help your game. That's kind of a clunky way of saying it, but that's basically what I'm saying. And you bring up a very good point, which it does focus heavily on improvisation. It does have a lot of degree of improvisation. My argument is that it helps you focus on improvisation because you're going to need to focus on improvisation. That even if you are a high prep DM who builds heavily structured games where you've got your scenes laid out, you know what kind of scenes they're going to be, you have the connections, you're going to find yourself flat-footed during your game sometime. And it could be when they decide not to talk to the main NPC you've created, but they talk to a sub-NPC that you never really spent much time with. When I talked, I'm going to name drop here for a second, but when I interviewed Matt Mercer a long time ago about NPCs, there was a couple of questions I had for him. One was like, how long do you prep your games? And he said, I spend twice as long prepping the game as I run the game. And then I said, and how many NPCs do you improvise compared to the ones that you prepare? And he said, half of them. Right? So this is like the most watched even at the time. I mean, I don't know that things have changed now. It'd be very interesting to ask him about that. But now that when we look at it, how many NPCs, if the most viewed role-playing game in the world at the time, half the NPCs that were improvised, it probably behooves all of us to be pretty good at improvising NPCs. We should get better at improvising NPCs. And one of the big arguments I make is if you find yourself regularly having to improvise NPCs and you find that you're actually okay with it, then why do you need to prepare the ones that you're not improvising? Can you improvise them all? And what are the things you actually need to improvise an NPC? What are the things that actually helps you? The answer is it's different for all of us. That we all have different things when we improvise NPCs. I have an article coming out tomorrow where I talk about improvising NPCs by using archetypes from TV shows when you can just pick one TV show. So you could say, like, I'm just going to have NPCs from Star Trek Picard. And I'm going to pick 8 or 9 NPC and 8 or 9 character archetypes from Star Trek Picard, and I'm going to use those in my campaign. And I'll just keep this list handy and I'll go through it. That can work really well. The dirty secret is I don't even do that. That I really don't even need that part of it. Sometimes all I need is a name and in my head, a general motivation. And I can roleplay NPCs well enough that my players continue to come down to the table. Do I stumble over myself? Yes. Do I struggle with words or contradict myself? Yes. That's okay, right? Sometimes we make mistakes, right? And sometimes we're like, oh, I forgot that this guy's NPC is actually different. That way to go. It's okay to stumble. That's the other one. We don't need this perfect game. And I think the more we try to reach for this perfect game, the harder I think it becomes. But part of the philosophy of Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, which I don't think I directly write about, but it's there, is since we're going to have to improvise anyway, why don't we focus on preparing to improvise rather than struggling against that idea? And that's where I think that you know, where there's a difference in what we're talking about. One thing I want to kind of pick on a little bit is you mentioned that it's kind of from the perspective of an experienced GM. That may be true to a point, but it's certainly not just my perspective. That when I wrote Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master, I interviewed hundreds of DMs and I surveyed thousands of DMs. And I read tons and tons of books about GMing and DMing and experiences from people DMing and stuff like that. I really wanted to get a wide open view about what the process of GMing was like. This is not a situation where I had a particular way that I ran games and I'm going to force it down your throat. I did not have the 8 steps in my own process till after I wrote the book. So it wasn't like, hey, for the last 20 years, I've had 8 steps that I use to prep my game, and now I'm giving them to you like a guru would do. I didn't come down from the mountains in the hills with my 8 steps. The 8 steps developed while I was working on the book from all of the stuff that I gathered from other GMs and listening to how they work and then breaking down the things that they used and really thinking about what the steps were before. And then I started using them as well. And they worked. They worked for me, right? And they work for lots of people. Lots of people like the 8 steps. But there's definitely questions that come up often, which is like, I get it regularly, like secrets and clues. A lot of people are like, yeah, right? That there's issues like secrets and clues is one of the weirder bits of the prep, but it is kind of gets exactly to what you're talking about. When you're talking about things like, I need to prepare my dialogue ahead of time and I struggle for the words and I contradict myself. Secrets and clues are a way to help you with that because you might not know which NPC is going to state something as a fact, but you know what the fact is. And whatever NPC they interact with, if that NPC is the kind of NPC who would know the thing, now you've got your secret and clue to tell you the thing that they would say. And you've prepped that ahead of time. So you're not going to be contradicting yourself. You're not going to be struggling because you spent the time earlier to come up with those secrets that do make sense. That's part of the intention of a secret and clue is to give you facts that you can drop in at different places in your game, depending on the direction they go. That's that preparation to improvise. If you're improvising half of your NPCs, which is generally what, it's not unique to Matt Mercer. Lots of people have to improvise NPCs all the time. That's why random names are like the number one tool when people have like, what thing do you need in front of you? Like random names, right? Because I got to come up, names are hard to come up with, and I tend to have to come up with names. So if you're already improvising your NPCs, the way to give your NPC something solid to be able to discuss, even though you didn't know that NPC was going to exist, is by having those facts in front of you that you can then deliver through the voice of the NPC when they're talking to them. And that's the separation of secrets and clues. That's where that really comes out. Is this stuff kind of advanced? It can be. And this could be the kind of thing that grows over time. You could read it, and then you could go prep your own way and prep however you're going. You could go back and read it again, and maybe like, maybe try this. That works. Look, one of the things I'm doing, I haven't really spent a lot of time with it, but I've been thinking a lot about the descriptions in the 2024 D&D Dungeon Masters Guide, where they have these like half-page adventure scenarios. And I looked at those. I did it on a previous show. You can look it up in the Q&A or the Sly Flourish talk show database. I looked at those, and I felt like, wow, there's really not a lot here. Like it's way less than the stuff that you would have if you did the 8 steps of return, right? The 8 steps of return you can generally fit on a single sheet. And sometimes I struggle to fit it on a single sheet, but I managed to get it on a single sheet. 10 secrets and clues, strong start, scenes, monsters, NPCs, blah, 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 blah. I can usually get that on a single sheet of paper. I can't get it to half a sheet of paper, and I'm cutting half of what I do. And like, I don't feel like I'm over prepping, right? I definitely don't feel like I'm over prepping. And the idea that I would cut it down to half of that, wow, right? But that's what they did in the Dungeon Master's Guide, is those scenarios are half of what they have. And they do it because they don't have things like secrets and clues. They don't have things like describing locations. So take a look at those and ask yourself, like, that's even way less. And that's what the Wizards of the Coast designers are recommending for prep for your adventures. So I feel like that requires even far more improvisation than I'm comfortable with. So I think that's interesting. But I've been looking at those because one of the things I want to do is ask myself, are those actually good? Like, are they good ways to do it? Like, maybe you can do it that way. What if instead of like separating all of your stuff out, you kind of bring things in? So you have secrets that are connected to locations and NPCs and monsters, and then you break it on your scenes. But then I always go back to, no, I really like to have the stuff separate because I don't want to have my game fit in these, like, here are the 5 scenes that are going to occur, because what if they make a left turn? Like, if you're traveling through a dungeon, you want the dungeon to have optional paths. And I'll tell you, the way that 4th edition did it is that dungeons were 3 rooms with 1 hall that connected each of the rooms. Like, that was how dungeons were built in the 4th edition era, because you couldn't really do much else other than that. That's not exactly true, but a lot of times that's how they ended up. And going to the 5th edition style, which is actually more like the OD&D style of dungeons with lots of alternative paths and secret paths and loopbacks and level changes, and you don't know where they're going to go. You're either going to have to prepare every single room in the dungeon, which is going to take you forever, or you have to get comfortable with improvising your game and this is what I recommend, getting comfortable improvising your game, separating out the components of your game so that you can drop in the right things at the right time to fill in a chamber depending on what chamber they go. So you're paving the path in front of them as they're driving along the road, rather than trying to pave all possible paths. As always, this stuff serves you. It's not for me. There's no right answer. There's no one way to do this. That you get to decide what prep works well for you. I am offering a framework for it. And it's a framework that is built by talking to dozens to hundreds of DMs and surveying thousands of DMs and reading tons and tons of books on this style and trying to distill it down to the things that can really help people improvise their game, recognizing how important improvisation is in running our games. But you get to decide what goes there. I've talked about how scenes is a catch-all step that you can put lots of different things into, including adventure hooks and including multiple different paths, lots of things. You know, what are the future 3 options you're going to offer to a character? Those are the kinds of things that can go in the scenes area. You get to decide for each of these steps what's useful for you. Maybe 10 steps is too many. Maybe 5 is easier for you, and you actually end up never needing more than 5. I'm not the boss of you. You can decide what to do. I have reasons why I think 10 is right, but you might decide, for me, those aren't right. So all of this stuff serves you. So if you find yourself struggling with the ideas of the lazy GM, and you find your own process works better for you, you are under no obligation to support the process that I'm offering. Not you running games for your friends and running them well in a way that you enjoy, in a way that your friends enjoy, is more important than anything else. And what I'm offering is, here are some ideas. And if the ideas work for you, great. If they don't work for you, throw them away. Right? Absolutely. There's a whole chapter of Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master, which you can buy in the Sly Flourish Bookstore, by the way. If you don't own a copy, go buy it at Sly Flourish Bookstore. There's a whole chapter about how do you make those prep steps work for you. And a lot of that is throw away what doesn't work, right? So that is a big piece. So Adam, I'm hoping that helps answer your question. And I hope you are, even if you decide that the steps that are in Return are not for you, I'm hoping by thinking through the process, you're able to kind of think about the process you've got and refining it and the experiences that you have at the table with your friends and figuring out how things go. Every month on Sly Flourish, we have the Patreon Q&A. It's actually going to start moving to quarterly in 2025. 2025, beginning next week, we're going to move to a quarterly schedule for the Patreon Q&A. We will still have questions answered every Friday. Patrons are still able to ask questions every month on the Patreon thread, but I'm only announcing it every quarter. It saves me a little bit of effort. Smooths the path of the giant surge of questions that come up every month, and now does that quarterly instead of monthly. We pick some of those questions and bring them here to the talk show, and we have our continuing questions from December 2024. James H. says, I have a very cool player whose character is a battlefield control wizard. What recommendations do you have for a character who spams spells like slow, blindness, web, etc.? He will frequently combine this with portent dice to ensure that the most difficult enemies fails the saves. I don't mind the strategy, but also want the battles to remain a challenge. This is an excellent question that dives right into the idea of lightning rods. The idea of lightning rods is when you know the kind of stuff that your players and your characters are bringing to the table, rather than trying to find ways to circumvent that, you instead find ways to let them enjoy the powers that they've got and still let the battle be a challenge. And you do it by adding monsters in there that are specifically designed to eat those powers. I like to refer to them as sin eaters, right? The sin eater is a creature that goes in there whose sole purpose is to eat banish, right? You have a creature like a rock that flies in, super powerful creature, does tons of damage, huge hit points, but very susceptible to the banish spell, which means you can use banish to your advantage. The same way goes here. So one answer to your question is let them continue to use spells like slow, blindness, web, and etc. One thing that you might want to do is make sure that if they're going through a big area, that they don't have lots of opportunities for long rests so that they don't continually refresh all of the spells that they have all of the time. But then think about what kind of creatures work well for these sort of things, slow, blindness, web, etc. And creatures that have lots of attacks, lots of creatures that have lots of attacks work really well, where slowing and blinding them is going to directly affect their ability to act. A lot of times when I think about lightning rods, I think there's basically 2 big types of lightning rods. Lots of little guys and a handful of big guys. The lots of little guys are there to eat areas of effect. You can throw web up and web, a tremendous amount of creatures all at once, so they're all stuck in the web. Or you can blind a whole bunch of creatures so that all of them are blind and are way less effective at your attack. You can also have these great big guys that are good for things like slow. They're good for things like banish. They're good for things like polymorph. There are ways to get rid of these really big guys. And then the real ones that you want to worry about are your bosses. And the bosses you generally don't want to be totally affected by things like slow and blindness and web, because it really limits. The bosses just eat these abilities. And that's where you might think of things like doom points in Tales of the Valiant or legendary resistance. And the key with those is you want to tell your players ahead of time, hey, that boss has doom points. He's going to be able to break out of any of those kinds of things. These dudes over here, though, they're very susceptible to it. Sometimes you just have to point out the lightning rods, right? Those guys. And what I have not seen is players that are upset about the fact that you're kind of forcing the issue, even though you kind of are. But you're forcing it for a good reason. And you're forcing it not because you're trying to punish them for doing this. You're trying to say, look, the tension of this battle is going to be more interesting if you're trying to make sure to keep that horde of hard-hitting monsters at bay with things like web and slow and blind than it is to affect the boss with it. But maybe even still, you go ahead and let them do the boss, because when they web the boss and now the bosses are strained, all those dudes who they should have webbed, now they're attacking and they hit hard, and that becomes the threat. So you're still not totally pushing the battle to go one way. They might decide. I had it where there was a rock. It was actually when they were battling the Frost Maiden in Rime of the Frost Maiden. They were battling whatever her name is. And she had a rock with her. And the rock had no legendary resistance, but she did. And I made sure it was clear to the characters that she has legendary resistance. If you try to cast these things on her, she's going to break free. Oral, that's her name. I pushed it out of my mind. But the rock does not. And the rock has a terrible charisma save. And they cast banish on the rock and failed this, and it made the save like twice in a row. And now I feel bad because his whole point was that it would fail to save, and it just rolled really well. It rolled like 18, 19, and 20 or something like that. They finally got it on the third try, but they were really at risk because the rock was busy grabbing people and chewing them up and eating them up. So it was really difficult. So James, that's the thought is think about, and it's going to matter on your specific situation. Think about what kind of monsters work well as eating those abilities, like guys, Maroliths with 6 arms. It's great to slow a Marolith, it's great to blind creatures that need sight in order to see. It's great to web lots of creatures that have lots of mobility. Somebody brought it up in the chat here. Shoot the monks, it's called. Robert Tables, of course, brought it up. Shoot the monks, right? Shoot arrows at your monks because they want to be able to return the bow. That's the lean into the character's abilities instead of trying to force them out. But you can basically throw extra monsters in there that are specifically designed to eat those abilities and still keep the threat of the battle high. John Y says, I've heard you mention a few times that you have games with a mix of members being in person and online in the same game. I run 3-4 different games every other week, and one of my in-person games has a member move to the other side of the state. It's not been a huge change since I have an all-online game that I was restarting, so I asked him if he'd want to join that. I have experience with Roll20, and I'm fine with in-person games. My question is this: how do you do both simultaneously? Do you use a digital map and make the in-person people use their digital tokens? Is it more theater of the mind? I'd really like to try this out with my Wayward member since he's been such an integral part of the story. We do a very simple situation where one of our players uses an iPhone we're playing at his house, and he has a chandelier where he can sort of rest the iPhone up in the chandelier, aiming down at the table, so that the player who's playing over Discord has a video feed of seeing what the map is like. And we've asked him, and he says that's working perfectly fine for him. I do run a lot of theater of the mind combat, and I don't worry about counting squares and stuff like that. So he can have sort of a lower resolution version, but he's able to blow it up. The iPhone has a great camera. The other day we played at my house instead of my friend's house, and I have a little tripod camera or a little tripod for my iPhone that we used to aim the iPhone at the table again so he could see, and it worked really well. That sort of just having a camera that's displayed on our physical display worked really well. In my other game where Michelle and I play together, and we play with another couple who plays together and 3 other friends of ours, and they're all playing remote. In that case, Michelle and I bring our laptops up to the table. We sit in the same room. We use one microphone to speak between the two of us, and we We use visual. For that one we use Theater of the Mind, so we don't even have a battle map. But we have used Owlbear Rodeo in the past and shared it that way. So that way, kind of everybody that was there, which is basically just two of us, but then two other people that are both in the same room as well. We use digital devices to do that. So that can matter. I've heard other people that use things like Roll20 with a visual display, and people move their tokens around with whatever display they have, and that can work too. So there's lots of different options and lots of different ways. If you want to get that more in-person feel, the idea of having your remote person, since it's only one of them, using a camera to be able to view your physical stuff, that works really well for our game. That's actually what I'm going to be doing here in about 40 minutes. So that works really well. But you get to try a bunch of different things, and there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. But what I found is actually an iPhone with the microphone turned on and the camera displaying at the thing, that alone has been a fine way to share a in-person game with somebody who's playing remote. And the person who's playing remote has still enjoyed and is still very engaged and is having a good time. Jack of Hearts says, regarding homebrew rules for player-facing mechanics, if you want to buff an option that a player chose for their character, would you do it as a table rule, or would you prefer to grant it to them as a magic item or boon? Sometimes a poorly built character for flavor reasons can underperform mechanically, but I don't want to discourage this. Both of those are fine options, and I have done both. In some cases, building custom magic items that work well for that character, that enhance that character's abilities, can be a definite way to do it. Sometimes it's not always like making them more powerful in a linear way, but expanding the number of things that they can do so they have new options. And you can do this by adding spell effects onto magic items. You can make magic items that have different effects that help them in other ways. So I think custom building those magic items is a fine way to do. Just don't take it away from them for, oh, somebody stole it from you. You could also give it to them as a boon. But there are some times where they might look at an ability like a subclass ability that doesn't just quite pull the same weight that other subclass abilities would. And you could say, well, what if we did it this way instead? Right? What if we just changed it? So there was a particular, I think it was like the Hospitaller. There's a Hospitaller subclass in Tome of Heroes that just wasn't quite good enough. And all we did was take one of the options that was an action and turn it into a bonus action. And when we did that, it now became far more useful, but not overpowered. And that was a conversation between the player and I, and me taking a look at it, and the player taking a look at it and saying, what are the ramifications of this? And also recognizing, like, if we chose this thing to work this way, and it ends up being broken, that we can further work on it. And everybody kind of agrees that that's the case. And in my mind, that is a really great way to go. Shows the flexibility of tabletop role-playing games, the way that we can work with our players to build the game that we want at our table with all of this material that we bring in to help support us, rather than saying, oh, because it's in this book, we have to play with it this way. It's a little harder when you're nerfing something, because you're almost always at an antagonistic side where the player really loves a thing, but it's kind of breaking the game. Sometimes I've had it where players like, yeah, that thing's totally broken. And I'm like, what if we did this? And like, yeah, that would be fine. Right. And then it works out really well. But I think you can really do it both ways. I don't think you have to choose one way or the other, that you can augment a character by giving them new magical abilities or boons, or you can directly affect some of the abilities that they've got to make them better. It's really the specifics of the situation and which way you think is going to be most fun for the player and work best in the game. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. If you enjoyed this show, please consider subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator for signing up, and you get a weekly article sent directly to your inbox with all of the links to all of the work that I do, along with a big, fun article about how to run your tabletop role-playing games. You can also support me directly on Patreon. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, and tools like the Patreon Q&A database and the talk show topic database and all kinds of other things you get for being a patron. It's a really good deal. And you can pick up any of my books at the Sly Flourish bookstore, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the Lazy DM's Workbook, the Lazy DM's Companion, Forge of Foes, City of Arches, and a whole lot more at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Thank you all so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.